So, welcome to day 51 of the Sociology Guide 2022 challenge. Looking at this week, we're looking at methods in context. Some of you may be going, "Well, okay, where's days 20 to 50? We've kind of moved this one forward because obviously the exam is next week. We're going to look at a methods in context question here. Now, I've put this up on the website and you can download all the material that is in this from the website. If you just go to the Sociology Guide 2022 challenge page, you'll be able to download the model essay. And methods in context questions are a little bit different to everything else. What you've got to do, you've got to take your knowledge of research methods and apply it to a specific educational context. Now, we're going to look at this um, item first of all. The item is really, really useful. There's at least 6 or 7 hints that you can develop to make the bulk of your essay, if you like. But what you've got to do is you've got to be able to develop those points, not just restate those points. You've got to be able to develop them a bit more. So let's look at the item. First of all, it says item A, interactions with teachers are a key factor in the experience of pupils in education. This is particularly the case with pupils from different ethnic groups who may be taught by teachers who have formed stereotypical views of their ethnic group. These interactions can be damaging to pupils' self-esteem and their chances of achieving. The extent to which these interactions are intentionally harmful is debatable, with some sociologists suggesting that teachers react in a range of ways to pupils from different ethnic backgrounds, having both positive and negative expectations of different pupils. The first paragraph in the methods in context always talks about the context, and it'll give you some clues that you may want to refer to when you're writing your essay. The second paragraph focuses on the method. A method that is commonly used in educational research is unstructured interviews. These are able to explore topics that are difficult to operationalize and provide respondents with the opportunity to express themselves. However, the scale of unstructured interviews and the time taken to conduct them are both limitations, particularly if conducted during the school day. And the question here is asking you to use material from item A and your knowledge of research methods, so you can bring other bits of information into it. Evaluate the strengths and limitations of using unstructured interviews to investigate teachers' racialized expectations. Now, if I was going to write this essay, which I already have done, but if I was going to write this essay in an exam, the first thing I would look at is the item. So I've made the item a little bit bigger so we can have a look at it. I'm going to go through each part of this item and try and give you some hints as to how you might write this type of question. So first of all, it talks about interactions with teachers are a key factor in the experience of pupils in education. So we know that these teacher interactions is something that we're going to investigate. So we might be doing some unstructured interviews with teachers. That might be who we are interviewing. This is particularly the case with pupils from different ethnic groups who may be taught by teachers that have formed stereotypical views of their ethnic group. Now, we know that there are stereotypes within education. We see some students as being stereotypically overachieving, some students are stereotypically underachieving. So, for example, there may be more positive stereotypes around Indian and Chinese pupils and more negative stereotypes around particularly Black Caribbean and white working class pupils. This might be something that you develop in your essay. You focused on these are some of the students that you may be interviewing if you were going to conduct this piece of research to find out what their views are of the way teachers interact with them. And that's something you need to think about. These interactions can be damaging to pupils' self-esteem and their chances of achieving. Now, this part of the item hints really that this is a sensitive topic. Students may not want to talk about something that has damaged their self-esteem. Also, if teachers are damaging students' self-esteem and their chances of achieving, teachers are less likely to admit that they are doing this. And this is something that you may develop in your essay. The extent to which interactions are intentionally harmful is debatable, with some sociologists suggesting that teachers react in a range of ways to pupils from different ethnic backgrounds, having both positive and negative expectations of different pupils. Now, this can hint at the idea that racialized expectations are very, very difficult to measure. We can also argue that if teachers have positive stereotypes of pupils and it pushes them a little bit further, or it means that they overachieve, this might not be seen as bad by the teacher, that they're stereotyping people. On the other side of that, you've got teachers may be unaware that some of the behaviours they're displaying towards their pupils are causing having an impact on their pupils' self-esteem. And therefore, this is an ethical concern that when you're doing an unstructured interview, teachers might disclose something and not realise that they have these expectations of pupils. It's what we call unconscious bias sometimes. But that's something you might want to put into your essay, that, this can be problematic for researchers if a teacher all of a sudden realizes that they have been acting in a very negative way towards a certain group of people. Let's look at the second part. And methods commonly used in educational research is unstructured interviews. Okay, straightforward. These are able to explore topics that are difficult to operationalize. Do we think racialized expectations is a difficult topic to measure? Do we think it's difficult to measure? That might be something we develop. And provide respondents with the opportunity to express themselves. Now, we know that this is a sensitive topic, so the ability for students to talk openly, for us to develop a rapport with them in order for us to be able to investigate that issue, is a big positive. And this might be something that you put in your essay. However, the scale of unstructured interviews and the time taken to conduct them are both limitations. Well, we know that teachers have quite busy days. We know students have busy days. We know that unstructured interviews take a lot longer. We also know that they take quite a while to analyze and to transcribe, particularly if they're conducted during the school day. If they're conducted during the school day and they're taking a long time, who might stop this research from taking place? We're what we call gatekeepers. So it could potentially be that head teachers will say, no, this is not the case. You're not going to do this research. You could also suggest that because the topic is very negative, that head teachers are less likely to allow researchers to ask these questions inside of the school. Now, I always, when I'm teaching my students about methods in context, I always get them to think about the who. Are they researching? The what are they researching? The topic, and how are they going to conduct the research? So I would break this down and think, right, let's look at the question. We're talking about racialized expectations, and we're using unstructured interviews. So who might we research? Well, teachers. We might research teachers. And there are some problems that we have with researching teachers. Number one, time constraints. Teachers have very busy schedules, and they usually go from one class to the next with, duty periods, meetings, all sorts. It may be difficult to be able to actually get them to take part in that research. That's a time constraint, something you need to consider. Impression management. Teachers are well rehearsed in changing the way they behave in front of a class, and therefore they may also change the way they behave in front of a researcher. Because this is a negative topic, they could potentially lose their job if they were found out to be have racialized expectations of pupils. This is very negative. So the potential loss of employment might mean that they don't take part. Although a benefit of it is that they will have a similar status to the researcher. And lots of researchers suggested that the more similar people are in status, the more likely you are to be able to interview them. It goes back to a study that was done by William Labov, who interviewed white students, and he interviewed black African American students. And he found that if you used an African American researcher, the African American students were more likely to open up to them because they were of a similar status. We're also going to interview pupils. Now, we could potentially be interviewing people. We will be interviewing pupils from non-white backgrounds. So there may be status differences between the researcher and those pupils, and they may not want to take part, particularly if they are they're saying something negative about their teachers. They might be afraid of the repercussions, and this is something that you have to consider as well. With the topic, it's a very sensitive topic, particularly for students who are on the receiving end of racialized expectations. It has an impact on their self-esteem, can have an impact on their achievement. We've seen that in the item. That might be something that we develop. Bad publicity for the school. Of course, if a school is found to have racialized expectations, it could create bad publicity. The counter to that is that most researchers provide anonymity and confidentiality. They do not name the school that they have researched. They will give it a pseudonym. It could lead to parental involvement. If parents find out that teachers have racialized expectations of their children, parents could get involved, which may be another reason why gatekeepers might not allow the subject to be researched. It's quite difficult to measure. It's quite difficult to measure what is a racialized expectation, because obviously there is the person who has the expectation and the person who's on the receiving end of those expectations, and they may differ. And the sociologist has to make a judgment as to whether or not the person has racialized expectations. And that is a very, very difficult thing to do. And they have to be highly skilled in order to be able to make that judgment. People will give socially desirable answers. We're talking about racism. The vast majority of people will want to be seen in a positive light when they are being interviewed in this way. If they do have racialized expectations, they may be incredibly reluctant to take part in the research because of self-incrimination. They could incriminate themselves, they could lose their jobs, they could be seen negatively. So then we may have a lower response rate with this. And then our strengths and limitations of unstructured interviews. Developing a rapport. Why is that useful for a sensitive topic? Well, we can make people feel at ease. We can make those students feel at ease. They may open up to us a little bit more. The research at present may lead to socially desirable answers. We know this is an issue with unstructured interviews. And certainly with a topic like racialized expectations, we may expect this to happen. However, we can ask probing questions, and this helps us out with the idea that racialized expectations are difficult to measure. Researchers, particularly skilled ones, can ask further questions to find out what the meanings and motivations were behind that person's behavior. They're time consuming to conduct and analyze, and we already know that from our looking at teachers, they have very tight time constraints, so it could be problematic. It is a potentially harmful topic. If we're asking people about how they have been racially profiled or racially stereotyped within schools, that could potentially cause people to feel uneasy. And this obviously is an ethical issue. How might researchers get over that? And another positive here at the bottom, the qualitative data that uncovers our meanings and motivations. It gives us a real insight into the issue. So this is how I've written it. Now, I've started out with an introductory paragraph. Some people say do an introduction. Some people say don't do an introduction. Personally, I think it is pretty much up to you. I would do them, but I would keep it quite brief. As you can see here, I've put as item states, unstructured interviews are a method commonly used in educational research. This is because they can provide researchers with large amounts of qualitative data that is preferred by interpretivists. So I'm starting to get a little bit of theoretical knowledge in here. This is very general to the method. Nothing really talking about the context at the moment. However, there are many strengths and limitations of the use of unstructured interviews, particularly when investigating a sensitive topic, such as teachers' racialized expectations of students. It's not a brilliant introduction. It's setting the scene. I will get some credit in there because I've talked about how unstructured interviews are preferred by interpretivists and they produce large amounts of qualitative data, but I can do a lot better than that. And we're going to go into the main body to show you how we do that. So I like to do what I would say has been a 4-paragraph layout to a methods in context question. And in each paragraph, I like to put forward either a strength or limitation and then counter that with the opposite. So if I put forward a strength, then I will counter it with a limitation. So really what I'm getting in is 4 strengths, 4 limitations across the full essay. There's no exact science on sort of like what is a good essay length and what is a bad essay length. A lot of it is about quality rather than quantity. So let's look at how I've done this. One strength of using unstructured interviews is that the researcher can develop a rapport with those they are interviewing. So there's my strength or limitation of unstructured interviews. Now I'm going to link in the context a little bit. This is an advantage when investigating sensitive issues such as racialized expectations. Now I've only stated the context here, so I need to do a little bit more. As pupils who have been victim of racial stereotyping, now that is certainly specific to racialized expectations, may be reluctant to talk about their experiences for fear of either not being believed or that they're exaggerating the scale of the problem. Now, this I would see as being a really good point that the student is making. In developing a trust relationship with the pupils, the researcher can get pupils to open up about their experiences of such a sensitive topic issue. Now, that for me is a good response. We've talked about the method. We've talked about a limited strength or specific strength of the method. We've talked about the pupils. We've talked about how pupils are involved in it. And we've also talked about the topic. So I would see that as being a good response. And here's how I counter it as well. So every time I put forward a strength, I will put forward a limitation. Every time I put forward a limitation, I will try to do a strength within the same paragraph. However, a limitation of using this method is that there may be status differences between themselves and the researcher. So this is talking again about the method. Furthermore, depending upon the gender, social class, and ethnicity of the researcher, they may be perceived by the pupil to be part of the issue, particularly if they have been subjected to racialized expectations from teachers from similar backgrounds. Okay, not quite as good as the first part of the paragraph, but what I have done is in a way, I've evaluated this idea that we can develop a report, that the researcher is part of this, and what the researcher sort of like influences the respondents' actions. And so I'm starting to talk. I've linked the method to the people who are being researched, and there is a little bit of a mention of the racialized expectation. So I'd see that as being a decent response. But if we combine that with the first one, that is a really good, strong paragraph I think we've got, certainly to start us off. Paragraph 2, a strength of using unstructured interviews to investigate teachers' racialized expectations is that the researcher can ask follow-up questions and probe for more detail. This is particularly relevant with a topic such as racialized expectations, as for some pupils, the impact of teachers' interactions with them will not be obvious at first. Using follow-up questions will allow the researcher to fully understand the impacts on the pupil's self-esteem and experiences at school. Now, I could have put as seen in item A there and probably missed out a little bit in terms of application, but what I've done is I've talked about teachers' racialized expectations, probably could have been developed a little bit more, but we've talked about how the pupils and how it impacts on them. So again, a decent paragraph, and I've criticized that at the bottom by saying, however, critics may argue that this leads to researchers making subjective interpretations and could cause leading questions to be asked. We know that that's a potential limitation of unstructured interviews, which in turn could impact negatively on the validity of the research. So this is what I perceive as being a standard kind of evaluation. It's not really focused on the context. It's not focused on the group. We could have developed a bit better, say making subjective interpretations about what people perceive as racialized expectations, but it's still a good response. Paragraph 3, a limitation of using unstructured interviews with teachers when investigating racialized expectations is that they may employ methods of impression management. Okay, so here's my limitation specific to the method. Let's bring in the topic. As the topic of racialized expectations is highly sensitive, teachers are unlikely to disclose their true motivations as it could have impacts on their career and so will be more likely to give socially desirable answers, and this may impact on the validity of their responses. That to me has got everything in. We've talked about the teachers. We've talked about a specific limitation of unstructured interviews. And what we've done is, the idea of socially desirable answers. And what we've done is we've mentioned the topic in there. We've talked about racialized expectations and how it's a sensitive issue. And that may mean that people give socially desirable answers. I've decided to put a strength in to counter that. A strength of using unstructured interviews in this instance will be that researchers can monitor body language for signs that the teacher is being untruthful and could ask further questions to uncover their true feelings on the issue. Could have talked about the issue a little bit more. So I'd see this as only being decent. It's not strong. But what I've done again is I've presented a limitation and then I've countered it with a strength. Paragraph 4, a further limitation of using unstructured interviews to investigate racialized expectations would be the willingness of the teacher to take part. Okay, so we're talking about the teacher and the willingness, not necessarily specific to unstructured interviews here. When investigating racialized expectations, Mirza found resistance to her research from various teachers, including verbal abuse from teachers when asking them to clarify points made. Now, some students sort of say, oh, if we know research, can we put it in? Yes and no, right? Because lots of times students will put in a piece of research and talk about the findings, and that's not what the question is asking you. If you know a specific characteristic of that research, for example, like I've mentioned there, that Heidi Mirza was got resistance from teachers when she was performing her piece of research into racialized expectations on teachers. If you know something specific like that, then use it. If it's part of the methodology, use it. If it's the findings, don't, because you could go off on a big tangent. If you know something that is specific about that research method and that sociologist used, then it can be done quite skillfully. If not, it can take you off on a tangent talking about racialized expectations and talking about findings into racialized expectations and the different types of teachers that Mirza found within her research. And you're not answering the question, then you're going off on a tangent. To add to this paragraph, furthermore, head teachers acting as gatekeepers may be reluctant to allow researchers to access teachers and pupils, as if the research found the presence of racialized expectations in the school, this could have negative consequences and could result in parental complaints or negative publicity. Again, I'm talking about the who, the what, and the how. We know that racialized expectations is going to generate negative publicity. We're talking about access. Possibly less so with the unstructured interviews on this one. It's more about general research there. However, researchers should address this issue by ensuring confidentiality of responses and anonymity of both the institution and those taking part. So again, you're showing a good bit of knowledge. You're providing a little bit of evaluation in here. Now, conclusions. Conclusions probably in methods in context aren't as important as they are elsewhere. The major skills that like within a methods in context question is application rather than analysis and evaluation. But I would still make an appropriate conclusion about the effectiveness of using unstructured interviews to investigate racialized expectations. So in conclusion, the use of unstructured interviews to investigate teacher racialized expectations is beneficial and it might uncover the reasons for racialized expectations and the impacts of these on pupils and prompt further research or policy changes. However, the information gained lacks reliability as it's unlikely to be replicable given the nature of the interviews because the interviews go off, people asking probing questions. Could have developed that point a little bit more. That's something you may want to do. Furthermore, the small-scale nature of the research would not lead to developing large-scale changes across society, but rather minor changes to the way in which individual schools tackle the issue of racialized expectations. So overall, I've made some really good points in there. I've made some decent points, but I've shown a knowledge not only of the impact of racialized expectations, I've made a lot of reference to sort of like the people that we may research in there and the way they may act when the research is being conducted. And I've made a lot of comments about the strengths and limitations of that method. So I would see that as being possibly maybe a 16 out of 20 or something, if I'm being possibly a little bit generous. But I think that's a good, strong essay. And this is what you kind of need to do on a methods in context. Now, day 52, so we're going to do this one next. Using material from item A and your knowledge of sociological research methods, evaluate the strengths and limitations using group interviews to investigate anti-school subcultures. This is what I'm actually doing with one of my classes at the moment. It kind of screams at you, Paul Willis is learning to labour. And you will see in the item, there's lots of different things that you could use. And the idea is that, you know, in this type of essay, you're thinking about, okay, we're going to be trying to have a group interview with a group of boys, potentially working class boys, who are going to be have an anti-school attitude. What are some of the problems that you may face as a researcher when you're doing that? We'll try and get those up. I'm trying to get through the methods in context ones as quickly as I can before the exam on the 23rd of May. Hopefully you will hit like and subscribe. I hate asking people to like and subscribe. But if you do like these videos and they are helpful, please do that. It helps some kind of algorithm somewhere. And also, it means you're notified of future videos. You can always unsubscribe as soon as you've finished your sociology A level. It does tend to happen. I get lots of people unsubscribe the minute that they have finished their A levels. If you have enjoyed this video, great, give it a like. Um, Hopefully, it's been useful to you, and hopefully, it will help you get good grades. Thanks for watching.